Hello, Organ Moto John here. We're going to go ahead and bleed some brakes today and flush the brake system on a KTM 300. This would work on multiple dirt bikes. But honestly, I'm doing this introduction after the fact because I was going to use a reverse bleed system and I was going to try a vacuum bleed system that I got from Tusk. And it looks like a nice kit. But I thought I would just start with this mini bleeder from Motion Pro, and honestly, it works so well. I didn't use the other systems. Now, continue to watch to see how to use the Motion Pro mini bleeder. It worked fantastic. Now, if I had a dry system, I could see where reverse bleeding or vacuum bleeding probably would be the way to go to make sure you get everything out of it. But if your system's already full and you're just flushing brake fluid out or have a little air in your lines, like I did, I think this is a great way to go. So here's the Motion Pro little mini bleeder. It worked great. I got firm feel in both my front and rear brakes, but my system was already full. So if you're just doing getting a little air out of your system, or bleeding it, or flushing it, maybe put a different way, I think this works terrific. Go ahead and I'll show you how to use it. Just keep watching. So you're going to need some brake fluid. You can use car brake fluid that's .4 or .5 approved, but look at your bike. It'll always say in the manual or many times on the master cylinder what you need. This is some fluid that I used before, and I always put an X on something when I use it, and this is old. I mean, I remember the last time I used it, which means it's too old. So I got some new brake fluid here. This is just pretty standard stuff. Like I said, you could use car brake fluid, but this was like 12 bucks. I mean, I could spend 12 bucks to support a motorcycle company. It's not like it's $25. Another thing that I'm going to do to make this easier is I'm just going to poke a hole to pour from, rather than remove the cellophane completely. I have my KTM 300 TPI. Last time, my brake, I put new pads in it when I first bought it. It was used, and that fixed the brakes for a while. I think it was just actually pushing the caliper piston in that seemed to probably helped it more than anything, more than the new pads. And then last ride I pretty much lost my rear brake until things got really warm, and then it seemed to work okay. At least I got my brake back without having to stand on it. So there's something going on in here. I've got air in there. This is a 21, and I don't think anybody's ever changed it, and so this brake fluid is, 3 years old, 4 years old, so it's time to come out. So I'm going to start with a flush, probably using the bleed system. I have something else you'll need. I have a drain pan here in case I have a massive leak. I have something to scoot under it. I'm going to tuck towels around here. I have a wet towel up here that I pre-wet, so I have something ready to go to help clean things. And you want to keep brake fluid off your paint. I want to wear gloves to keep it off my hands. I guess brake fluid is pretty hard on paint, so we're going to tuck towels all over. So let's go ahead and tuck towels around here where this bleed nipple is, and of course around here where we're going to be filling. Another word on brake fluid. I've heard that you can store these upside down after you open them to help seal it. That actually seems like a good idea to me. You guys let me know what you think in the comments, but I think that would fill it with fluid, so then you have the air up here where technically air shouldn't be able to seep in, but I thought that was a good idea. Let me know what you think though. Does that work? But this is too late. I didn't do this, so I'm not using it. I opened it up and it actually looks darker than I think it should, so we're going to recycle this. So let's start with the traditional method. I'm going to put this on the bleeder valve and put the end of the hose into this so we can see if we can manually pump fluid through. Now the cool part about this is it has the wrench built into it. So you just slip this on. Of course, you remove your rubber cap, make sure that's clean. This goes on, and then this can fit on there. And now we're ready to break that with this little wrench here. You can slide that on and off as needed. So I thought that's a nice feature. And it also has a check valve in there to help it from backflowing. Okay, now we're going to put this end into a container. I just have a water bottle here. I'm going to cut a slit, an X with a box knife, a small one, for that tube to fit through. I put this like so that air bubbles technically could go up. It doesn't really matter because there's a check valve, so if you didn't have a check valve having in this tool, just you could use a regular piece of tubing. Having this going up so air bubbles could go up would work. Now we're going to remove this, and we're going to tuck towels around this and tuck towels around this caliper. I was a little worried about that water bottle falling out of there when I was bleeding, so I just put some zip ties around the wheel to the water bottle. You wouldn't need to do that. Here you can see towels around the rear caliper to catch fluid. I have a catch basin down there just in case. And then towels tucked around the reservoir. If I were doing the front brake, I'd do the same thing. And as you can see right there, it says use only .4. And it looks like in this application, this is a 21 millimeter to remove this. So we're going to remove this now. There we go. We're just going to unthread this and then put this aside somewhere clean. That'll have a little bladder in there. Make sure once you remove this, you wipe any contaminants from around the rim there. You could use contact cleaner if you want. And then you can see how it's this milky color in my oil a little bit. And then if we look in here, it looks dark and kind of, it's hard to see, a little milky there. So it's good. We need to flush this. So I'm going to start by sucking that out because I know what's in here is bad and we don't want to pump that through. So I'm going to suck that out with a syringe. I'm also going to carefully wipe out around the inside of this rim here to get, you can see there's debris there. We don't want that falling into the braking system. So I have a syringe here just with a tube on it, and we're just going to suck some of that old stuff out of there. There's not much in there, but it's hard to see on camera, but it's kind of milky color and it definitely looks old. So we're going to dispose of this. There's so little that comes out, I don't even know if that's worth pumping out of there, but I guess it wasn't hard to do. Now that this is emptied out, I'm going to fill this with some clean brake fluid. You could use a syringe to do this if you have a clean one. I just decided to pour that in. That's going fine. Okay, well, let's see if this old-fashioned method works. I'm going to pump on the brake lever. So we're going to crack this open now. Turn it down to the left. Oh, that is stuck. There it goes. I don't think this thing's been bled in a long time. So just a half turn to a turn will be plenty there. That's loose. Okay, now I'm going to just start pumping. And we're going to keep refilling our reservoir up at the front here as needed. I'm watching that so that level doesn't drop. And I can see lots of air coming out already. Oh man, look at all the contaminants in there. Wow. This definitely needed to be bled. I mean, there's all kinds of little goobers and things in here. I want to make sure this tube isn't gonna fall out. I'm gonna push that in there a little more. Okay, good. And let's keep pumping. Wow, this is quick. Doesn't want to build pressure. There it goes. Okay, let's refill this reservoir. And you don't have to, once this is open, you don't have to open and close it with this method. So let's refill our master cylinder. Okay, we're going to keep pumping our brake lever, so let's keep doing that. See all the contaminants and things going out. With this orientation of this being up, it's nice, it lets the air bubbles go out, but you can see this fluid is definitely not clear. Oh, this brake pedal is feeling better already. Okay, getting lower on the reservoir. I'm going to pump it a little more, and I'm going to keep pumping till new fluid, clear fluid's coming out. I think we're actually getting pretty close. Now, something you can do, I think it's a good idea, is to push on this caliper against the disc, put your hand behind the rotor, and then your palm of your hand in front, and then push those. I'm just depressing that piston in. See if we get any more air bubbles out of here. So that's something you can do, and then you re-pump the brake to reset that caliper. And I don't see any air coming out anymore. I think we got it, and it pedal feels actually quite good. Okay, I've bled this, or pumped this fluid through 3 or 4 times here, and it's coming out looking clean. I mean, you can see the old fluid looks bad, kind of milky, and new fluid is coming in on top that's clear. You can see it in the hose. It looks really, really good. I'm not getting any more air bubbles out. So I'm going to pump one last reservoir out for good measure, and then we'll fill it about 3/4 full to leave room for that little rubber bladder to be able to displace into that reservoir. And then we'll clean this up with some contact cleaner, and I think that'll do it. And then I'm going to pump this lever. It feels really firm, and then I'm going to just release it. I'm going to pump this again. I'm going to refill my reservoir. So I refilled my reservoir. Just to finish this up, I'm going to pump on the pedal, build a little pressure, and then just crack this. And I'm going to pump it up and then crack this. And I don't see any air coming out, and the pedal feels good. And so we're going to close that, remove it, put that back on, fill this up to 3/4, and we're done. That feels good. I really like this setup. So here we are, refilled. I'm going to put the cap back in, and we'll just remove this, make sure that's snug down, and tighten it up. I really like this Motion Pro tool. You could use a piece of this piping and just make a loop to catch the air bubbles and go up to this. That would actually work just as well. Once in a while, don't be misled. When you crack this, sometimes air will seep in around the threads if you open it more than a half turn or a quarter turn. And so just be aware that sometimes you'll see air coming in here, little bubbles, and it's just from what you introduced through the system when you cracked this to the threads. It's not necessarily in the brake system. So yeah, I'm happy with how this worked. That was very easy. I've always been a little intimidated by brakes, but man, don't be. This was easy. I should have done this years ago. So hope that helps. I'm going to go to the front next. Yeah, you'll want to clean this up with some contact cleaner, because when you pull this stuff off, there's always a little bit that sneaks out. So clean that up, and then also come up here and let's clean this up with some brake cleaner too. Might as well get this clean. Wow, this worked really well. I mean, you could reverse bleed. It's another good way to do it. You could vacuum bleed. But this worked so good today, I think I'm going to stop right there. The brake feels good, but maybe if you had an empty system, vacuum bleeding would make sense, reverse bleeding to fill it. But when it's already filled, this Motion Pro device might be the way to go. Now let's move on to the front. Looks like this takes a Torx 20 for this application. Sometimes it takes a Phillips or the Japanese equivalent of a Phillips. And we'll just go ahead and remove these. You can level up this reservoir before you start, but mine's fairly level. I could rotate this up maybe a little bit more. Sometimes you can play with your handlebars to get a little better orientation too. Just a little tip, when we put these screws back in, we're going to put a little bit of grease around the shoulder of this screw. Not necessarily the threads as much as the shoulder. Look at how rusty that is. Sometimes those can seize in there, so we're going to put a little grease around the shoulder of that screw to help prevent them seizing in there. Just as before, we're going to tuck rags all around this to catch fluid so that I don't burn up, damage the painted surfaces or other surfaces. So let's take a little time, tuck rags around there and also around the front caliper. Now that we have towels and rags packed around that, we're going to just go ahead and remove that. This fluid looks pretty clean, but we're gonna pump it through anyway. Be sure to wipe down any contaminants around the edges on the cap and the center surface. So here we are down at the front caliper end. We have towels tucked around. I have a container here in case I were to spring a bigger leak. Didn't need it on the back, but I'd rather have it. So towels tucked around here, and then we'll remove this rubber cap off, and then we'll put our Motion Pro bleeder tool on there. And then I'm not affiliated with Motion Pro in any way. I just think this seems to be a good tool. So here we are. We're just going to put our tool on here. This is also an 8mm, and it just has a little rubber gasket in there. So you're just going to push and seat that on there. There it is. And I think I have this in a pretty good spot. I would rather have that tube up so I can see the air bubbles. So it's not necessary since there's a check valve in there. So I think I'm going to leave it that way for now, just for ease of bleeding the system. So let's go ahead and break this. Just like a half turn will do it. And then we're going to go back up top and start relieving some, pumping this fluid through. This looks way better than the rear did already. So here we are back up top. This fluid already looks way better than my other fluid did, but I'm just going to gently pump my front brake and move a little fluid through. And I'm going to refill this up top. So I top this reservoir off again, and I'm just going to pump some fluid out little by little here. See that reservoir level dropping. If I come around here, you'll see that the fluid is pumping out through my hose here into my bottle. And let's keep going till we get make sure we got some clean. Can we do a few cycles? I'd say I'm gonna put 3 or 4 cycles of fluid through that reservoir. Just don't let your reservoir run dry as you're pumping it, because if you do, then you'll have to start over. You may even have to reverse bleed the system, which wouldn't be bad. That wouldn't be the end of the world, but just all you gotta do is top that off. I've got that reservoir about half full now, so I'm gonna come down here and do what I did on the rear brake. I'm gonna push this, grab the back of the disc, and take the front of my palm of my hand and push this caliper over to depress the piston in to make sure if there's any air bubbles in there that I'm getting those out too, and then I'll go back up top and re-pump that and reset that, refill it. If the reservoir is filled to the brim and you push this up, displacing fluid back up to the system could overflow that, so just be aware of that. So that's why I took the master cylinder reservoir up top down about halfway before I'm doing this. And so now I'm just gonna kind of grab the back of the rotor and push that in. I'm actually going to use 2 hands in a second. It's moving a little bit, and you'll feel it move a little. So I pushed that caliper in, displacing the piston into the caliper, I should say, when I push that caliper in. Now I need to come up here and pump this brake lever to reset it, but I've lightly closed my bleeder here with my Motion Pro tool. So I'm pumping that up. I can feel the brake pads firming, pushing up against the rotor. They're firm. So I'm just going to finish this off with 3 traditional style bleeding maneuvers, where you're just going to do like 3 pumps up here, open the bleeder screw just a quarter of a turn. So I'm going to pump, pump, pump with my front hand, open, close, pump, 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 open, close, and one more, 1, 2, 3, open, close. And I'll tell you what, this feels good and firm up here, so I'm going to stop. That feels perfect. So make sure you leave room for the little rubber goodie. This should be about 3/4 full. I'm a little full right now, and that'll displace out of there and make a mess. So I'm actually gonna, you can soak some out with a paper towel. It's probably a good way to go. Or you could push a little through the system as long as you don't introduce any air. So here we are. We talked about putting grease around the shoulders of the screws. So we're gonna take our little brush here, get a little grease, and we're gonna put some grease around the shoulder of the screw, right around there where it seats in, so that it doesn't rust and seize where we can't get it out. So there we are. We got some grease around the shoulder of that screw, and now we can come over here and put it into our master cylinder, and hopefully it won't rust so much again. We'll just lightly seat those in there snug. This is just a little tip. If you don't remember the last time you greased your clutch pivot or front brake pivot bolts, pull these out. Just pull a little nut off the bottom. Pull this nut out, clean it up, put some grease on, and put it all back together. That can help things run more smoothly too. When you pull this out, there'll be a little spring preloaded that goes in here and then countersinks back in this little groove right here. Don't panic. Clean up all these surfaces with a rag, including that one, grease them up, and then grease up the bolt pivot points and put it back together. So we're going to put some grease on this pivot bolt here on that part where it articulates or moves. We'll put some on these surfaces here on the inside, and then we'll come over to the bike, and we'll make sure we get some grease on this little nubbin here, and then on this surface here that rubs, and on this surface up in here. And then you can put some in there if you want to help that spring just retain while you're putting it together. And yeah, just put it all back together. Easy, but that'll help your clutch, or excuse me, your brake and clutch feel too. Wow, that feels even better yet. Reason I checked that is I hadn't done that in a while. I didn't even think of it, but after I bled my brakes, this wasn't going back all the way. It was stopping just before it was out at full excursion. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe it's just a little bit too much friction in here. So I lubed that up, and now it retracts all the way, and it has a real nice feel. It modulates. And so make sure that this isn't just sometimes that just needs a little grease. So make sure you check that. To me, that gave it almost a better feel than bleeding the brakes did. Very crisp. Wow, that's great. Now we'll replace this little rubber goodie that I took off, and yeah, I might do my clutch too. Just be sure when you're all done to flush some contact cleaner through the Motion Pro, including the hose. You don't want brake fluid sitting in there, so flush it with rubbing alcohol, contact cleaner, whatever you think would remove that, just to get that off of there so it's not sitting there when it's in storage. Could degrade the parts of that a little bit. Just a quick word on when you purchase the Motion Pro mini bleeder. It comes in with different size millimeter, 8, 10, and probably other sizes millimeter attachments here to take the break open the bleeder. This is the 8 millimeter, which works on I think most KTM bikes. But just make sure you check your nipple, at the caliper where you break that loose to make sure you buy the right tool. And like I said, this is the 8 millimeter, and they come in 10, 11, and it looks like 3/8. So just double check that. You could just grab an open end wrench and come on down to your to this, and then you just kind of would put this on. Now we're not talking about this, of course. We're talking about this right here where you would break that loose. So this is 8 millimeter. So I got the 8 millimeter one. So just a little footnote. And yeah, try bleeding your brakes. I was always kind of scared of it. And all the motorcycles I've had good luck with brakes, so I just kind of left them alone. But I'm going to start flushing my brake system every so often, so it doesn't get to where it was like this bike, to where I actually was riding and didn't have a rear brake like half the time, seemed like. So, and it was intermittent braking, which is unsafe. So, and I'm not going to be scared with this Motion Pro bleeder. I'm not going to be scared to flush my brake system every so often and firm that pedal feel up. It feels really good now. So you know, don't be afraid of working on your brakes and bleeding your system. If you haven't done it for a while, go ahead and do it. All right, well, keep riding, and hope you're all doing well. Thanks for watching, and yeah, keep getting that two-wheel therapy and get out there and ride. So I did just put the tubeless system on the rear of this bike, and I'm going to try it next ride. I did try out the Mule Shock, Slavin's National Shock, and Raven front forks. They worked really well. I need to get the preload set, and I've got that set, some of the settings done, and it worked great last ride. So anyway, there you have it. Motion Pro bleeder / flush brake system tool. As I mentioned, brake fluid is hydroscopic, so it'll soak up water even if it's just sitting in your line, so it can get contaminated even if you're not riding your bike and sitting around. So just something to think about. And then, you know, this container, I've opened it. How long is it good for? They always say to use fresh brake fluid. Maybe you guys can chime in how long you would let brake fluid sit around before you reuse it. And then, does this trick work? Turn this upside down. You know, that in theory should prevent air from, you know, coming in through here. You know, does that work? Just a thought. It makes sense to me that it would. Just a last footnote is, I put new brake lines on an ATV years ago, and and it was a dry system, dry lines. Everything got, you know, drained when I did that. And I'll tell you what, the only way we could get those as a front brake, that system to you know, pump up solid was with reverse bleeding. So I think there are times where reverse bleeding with a syringe is the only way to go, especially if you're having trouble getting a firm feel. So I'll do, you know, at some point, I'm sure I'll do a video on that. But if your system's full and working reasonably well and you're just flushing the system, I think this method works quite good. But if you're having trouble getting the system bled in a crisp way, then I think reverse bleeding or vacuum bleeding would be worth trying. And I guess one of the main reasons I was scared to bleed brakes is I've had such tough experiences with cars where, man, you just struggle sometimes with those, and you have to have somebody else help you. And it's but with motorcycles, I mean, it's quite easy. So that, I guess that's just a point that needs to be made, is motorcycles are a lot easier to bleed than cars, and that's just something to take away from all this. So don't be scared of working on it. It actually is much easier than I thought it would be.